Emily Dickinson was a poet born in 1830 in Amherst, Massachusetts. She never lived anywhere but Amherst and lived the last years of her life a recluse, writing poetry. Only 2 of her poems were published in her lifetime. After her death, her sister found hundreds of poems. I've read somewhere up to 1,500. Only 2 of those had been published. Her sister got the poems she had written published, and Emily Dickinson's reputation grew from there, making her one of literature's most renowned poets. In fact, when one thinks of American poets, she does come to mind. She lived in an age defined by a struggle to reconcile traditional Christian beliefs with the newly emerging scientific concepts, the most influential of which was Darwinism. And she wrote, "Faith is a fine invention for gentlemen who see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency." Dickinson's struggles with faith and doubt reflect her society's diverse perceptions of God, nature, and humankind. Since she was reared in a Calvinist household, she went to the village meeting house with her family for services. That was Amherst's first congregational church. Congregationalism was the predominant denomination of early New England. She received her own Bible at the age of 13 from her father, and her familiarity with the Bible and facile references to it in letters and poems have long impressed scholars. In Dickinson's teen years, a wave of religious revivals moved through New England. One by one, her friends and family members made public profession of belief in Christ that was necessary to become a full member of the church. Although she agonized over her relationship to God, Dickinson ultimately did not join the church, not out of defiance, but in order to remain true to herself. Quote, "I feel the world holds a predominant place in my affections. I do not feel I could give it all up for Christ were I called to die." Unquote. Dickinson's attitude towards spiritual matters was complex. She was not a transcendentalist like Emerson, but she was well regarded by him. She admired the writings of Thoreau and kept her writing simple and at times stark. And as a recluse, she wrote for herself, following a transcendental ideal of being true to herself and being individualistic. The American Transcendental website states, "Some poems of Emily Dickinson seem to be transcendental, yet not quite. She appears to search for universal truths and investigate the circumstances of the human condition, sense of life, immortality, God, faith, place of man in the universe. Emily Dickinson questions absolutes, and her argumentation is multi-sided. The poetic technique that she uses involves making the abstract concrete, which creates striking imagery. Her poetry was a search for truth. She dismisses conventional faith, quote, the easiest way towards salvation, unquote. For example, she wrote, and this is only the first verse, "Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home, with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome." While her poems are saturated with the language, ritual, and expectation of traditional religious experience, her tone varies tremendously. Some poems affirm the need for faith. Faith is a peerless bridge supporting what we see. Irreverence underlies other aspects of her work. Quote, "The Bible is an antique volume written by faded men at the suggestion of holy specters." End quote. At times, Dickinson's poetry expressed outright anger with an absent God. Quote, "Of course I prayed, and did God care? He cared as much as on the air a bird had stamped her foot and cried, 'Give me.'" End quote. Despite her non-participation in public religious life, Dickinson's poems reveal a keen interest in issues of faith and doubt, suffering and salvation, mortality and immortality. Although we can't claim her as a UU, we can certainly see some parallels there. It's now time to give your financial support to support our church. As we receive no financial support from a national organization, we ask that you give generously. I accept this offering on behalf of the members of West Valley Unitarian Universalist Church. For our reflection today, I have another poem from Emily Dickinson. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life, the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. For our next hymn, it's in the Teal Hymnal. Please stand as you're willing and able and join me in singing hymn number 1021. It's a little difficult to follow after the more popular version. Nevertheless, the words were good. Terry Mead is a local attorney and mediator. He's been a member of this church for many years and has served us in many capacities. Been on the board of trustees, committee chair on various committees, and is always willing to help out when he can. Today, he's speaking in place of our scheduled speaker, who was called out of town on an emergency. Terry.
Begin with, I want to thank Jill. She always chooses selections trying to meet our theme, and today is no different. The opening piece, Dissonance to Resolution, is intended to try to show how musically you bring all of these disparate elements together and into something that ultimately has melody and meaning. And thus it is with death, I think, and dying and love. The theme of our month, as chosen by the worship committee, is love. And so how appropriate that I would choose something to start off on death. Hunter died. Or rather, he was put down. He'd been dying for 2 years, ever since that day in October when his owner returned to Ohio with her daughter and other animals packed into a car and leading a rental truck out of our neighborhood. It was a deliberate, but not a premeditated abandonment. Hunter was to Melinda what the unicorns were to Noah, off playing silly games. When it came time to leave, Hunter was left behind. I was there when Melinda put her other cat and the dogs into her car. Hunter was missing. Apparently he had run out as the crew loaded the truck and carried cast-offs and trash to the curb. It was later than she'd planned to leave. There was no time to wait, and Melinda seemed to lack the energy and the desire to search the neighborhood. Metaphorically speaking, the rains had begun, and Hunter missed his chance to climb into the ark. I was first to introduce to Hunter, in a manner of speaking, when I knocked on Melinda's door to inquire about a long-haired kitten we had begun calling DC, which of course stands for damn cat. I was trying to locate the owner of the small, noisy ball of fur that had begun sneaking into our house whenever a door was left cracked open. Melinda, whose family seemed to own most of the cats that roamed the neighborhood, was the obvious place to start. When I mentioned Gray and described the kitten's nearly constant meowing for attention, Melinda suggested Hunter and sent her children to the garage to find him. Hunter was, in her words, noisy, always talking. It's probably him. Her cats accessed the house and yard through the garage, solitary and shy without being furtive. Melinda's cats tended to walk across neighbors' front yards, sticking close to the buildings and occasionally stalking birds in my front yard. I once chased an orange tabby from just inside the sidewalk. I'd seen him crouching, getting ready to pounce from where he was on some birds. Well, he shot across the street and into the path of a car. He returned to my yard screeching until all the neighbors, alarmed at this noise, appeared, and Melinda sent one of the kids for a towel that she used to wrap the injured tabby and carry him back to the house. He later died. On that day, the kids returned without Hunter, but Melinda's description did not fit DC. Hunter, though young, was fully grown and solid gray. I vaguely recognized him from her description as an occasional prowler in the neighborhood, darting across the street to disappear under Melinda's side gate. He never came into our yard. Sheila, our aged golden retriever, had died. The feral white cat, Ghost, who had teased and tormented Sheila in her later years, had descended from the block wall and replaced her in repelling other felines. It was months after Melinda's departure before Hunter gravitated to our yard. By then he was furtive and so slim that his ribs showed through his short, plain gray fur. Ghost had softened, allowing occasional strays to take up residence in the backyard, as long as they did not challenge his supremacy. Hunter was allowed. He never approached the food dish while another cat was near. When Amy dropped treats around her chair, he stood at the edge of the scrum, waiting for the pieces she would place directly in front of him. He spent most of his time high on the block wall enclosing our main entrance. I watched him through the window at my desk. He usually lay there, safely above the occasional fray, never even joining in play. In fact, he never seemed to play, hunt, fight, or approach any of the other cats. Sometimes caught lying on a patio chair or table, he quickly abandoned the spot when another cat walked up, and even when there was no evident challenge. Shy around other people, Hunter readily but cautiously approached when Amy and I were outside, announcing his presence with that repeated, insistent meowing. He never strode powerfully like Ghost, or contemptuously like DC. He kept his head down slightly, moving slowly, focused on us, but warily watching the other cats as he walked. Some cats hold their tails straight up, a banner to be paraded. Hunter's tail, neither raised nor dragging, seemed merely to follow him half-heartedly, like a flag held by a tired child. In human terms, Hunter would have been the unremarkable teenager slouching near the lockers, avoiding the social tide that otherwise simply would have carried him down the school hall like flotsam to be deposited wherever chance would have it. For the last 2 years, Hunter more or less simply existed. Deposited on the shore of our yard, he may have craved security, but not affection. Wanting to be close whenever we were outside, Hunter would settle nearby, under a chair or near the patio table, legs tucked and eyes open, rarely curling up or sleeping. He did not care to be held or petted, and I don't recall ever hearing him purr. It was my granddaughter's 16th birthday. Amy was home with Leanna and several of her friends. Our neighbor, spare of both words and friendship these last 29 years, came over and asked Amy if she could get the cat that had been lying sick, possibly dying in his backyard for the last several hours. He knew that we had cats in our yard and assumed it was ours. I don't like cats, but I don't like to see them suffer either, he said. Amy and Leanna found Hunter lethargic, foaming at the mouth. They carried him back and put him into the garage with food, water, and a litter box. Amy sent Leanna to the grocery store for a baster. They used it to force water down Hunter's throat over the course of several days. In the end, it didn't matter. Noting the yellowish tint to his ears and gums, the vet announced that Hunter's liver had failed. Whether from poison or genetics, Hunter likely was in pain and would die. She and Amy decided to put him down. Amy held him, speaking softly and stroking his fur as he lay on the examination table. The doctor injected the anesthetic and rubbed it into Hunter's muscle, and his once wary eyes finally closed in sleep. Cindy Chan died over 4 years ago, August 17th, 2008. Like Hunter, she had been dying for years, but less of physical than of emotional causes. When she passed, it was alone and with a handful of pills. Cindy, Wai Sing was her traditional name, was the wife, actually the second wife, of my longtime friend Tom Chan. Some of you met Tom when he was part of our wedding party. Tom and I met the first day of our introduction to law school. We discovered that we shared the same birthday, although he was a year older. We'd both been raised Catholic. We both had large families. We were both married to women with professions. Mine was a nurse, his was a school teacher. He grew up in Hong Kong, where as I hailed from the somewhat smaller metropolis of Green Bay. We would share the same schedule that first semester and learn cross-country skiing together. Our paths diverged when I broke from law school for 2.5 years to play journalist. Tom went from Madison to Wausau, Wisconsin, to St. Paul, Minnesota, and eventually to Los Angeles, learning the emerging law of software copyrights and enforcing the law against software pirates in Southeast Asia. Along the way, he and his wife Jeannie divorced. Jeannie was a Midwestern woman, organic, hardworking, socially committed. She and Tom had met while both attended the University of Wisconsin at Whitewater, traditionally a teacher's college. In St. Paul, she began teaching English to the exploding numbers of Hmong immigrants who had fled the highlands of Vietnam after the United States withdrew its protection. They divorced, and Jeannie remained in St. Paul while Tom pursued his larger dream. Tom met Cindy through his sister, a professor at Columbia University. Cindy was studying nutrition. They had met at a gathering for his sister's students. Cindy was Chinese. Her parents lived in the Los Angeles area, part of the large ethnic community. She's very traditional, Tom told me, explaining the differences between her and Jeannie. He seemed to be trying to explain why the relationship had failed and why he hoped his relationship with Cindy would last. We met on the day of their wedding in the in the United Nations Chapel in New York. The reception dinner was held in the banquet room of a Chinese restaurant. Cindy taking the time to help my sons with their chopsticks. She was quiet and sweet, thin and petite to the point of appearing unhealthy. She had a ready smile in the early days, but her eyes were tentative, as if asking me whether I would accept her. That look never really left her eyes. I thought at first that she was afraid I would compare her unfavorably to Jeannie. I tried to show my acceptance, but distance always was a factor. We visited their home in L.A. when Kyle, a chunky fireplug of a baby, was still too young to play with my sons. By then, I believe Cindy had left her job as a nutritionist and was a full-time mother. We missed the birth of Inez. It was years before we met her. After my own divorce, and I had left my firm, Cindy tried to coax me into moving to L.A. and to join Tom as a litigator in his newly started firm. I couldn't leave my sons and the rest of my family for life in L.A. I'm not sure I could have left anything for life in L.A. But years later, when we pulled in front of their multi-level home, perched high in Palos Verdes Estates and overlooking Redondo Beach, Amy turned to me and asked, "Why not?" This was the first time that Amy would meet Tom and Cindy, and the last time we would see Cindy. Cindy still had that deer-in-the-headlights look in her eyes. By then, she was suffering the physical effects of carbon monoxide poisoning. Tom had found her in the garage with the car running. She needed help running the house and with cooking. She was still as sweet as ever, but she tired easily. She wanted to show us the sights on the peninsula, the flowers, a lighthouse, where Tom and I were caught in a photograph contemplating whether to ignore a sign before the ocean cliff reading, "Danger, do not cross fence." Beautiful glass-walled chapel. The drive, though, wore her out. At an anniversary party, scheduled early because of Tom's concerns about her health, I watched as Cindy shrank into the background. I couldn't tell whether she was being ignored by many of the guests or whether she was hiding from them. Yet she took pride in her children. Kyle already away at college, Inez attending a private school partway down the mountain. She shared albums of photographs with Amy. And the following year she accompanied the children on a lengthy trip to mainland China and shared photos with me by email. To this day I marvel at how she survived from day to day till that final day in August. Why do I recall Cindy and Hunter in this fashion? It's because I learned from them. More specifically, I learned from their flaws. From Cindy, I'm trying to learn to accept weakness, and in that weakness, to see the beauty and and strength and courage that it takes simply to live day to day. Scared, noisy Hunter reminded me that other creatures, men, women, and children, as well as animals, find themselves in situations not entirely of their own making, and need, if not help and assistance, at least acceptance and protection. And if one can learn from the flaws of dead friends and animals, why not the living? We are, after all, flawed. Some of us, perhaps more than others. As Shakespeare noted in Henry VIII, we all are men in our own natures frail. But it is easier to accept the flaws of the dead. We no longer need to live with the incessant chatter of one, the bullying of another, the annoying victimization of a third. For numerous reasons, it is also more difficult to speak or write about the flaws of the living. For one, the dead are less likely to retaliate. So I won't use specific examples from the living. However, look around you at your family and friends and co-workers. What is it about your spouse, your child, your boss, the waiter, a clerk? What is it that really irks you? Socks on the floor, a know-it-all attitude, the rolling eyes, sarcasm. lack of attention to detail. A million things you could hate about every person, right? Now, not every action need be accepted, but most of the personal flaws and irksome experiences that we face every day, particularly from our family and close friends, are not dangerous, just irksome, blows to our egos and assaults on our senses, but not on our bodies. They are unintended, or at least not intended to hurt us. Augustine Burroughs, the author of Running with Scissors, in his collection of memoir essays, Magical Thinking, writes, "I myself am made entirely of flaws, stitched together with good intentions." And thus it is with most people in our lives, as it is with most of us. Good intentions comprise the glue of our lives, not concealing our flaws, but holding them together in a package we might call our personality. So, look at the flaws of those around you, list them one by one, and consider all of the wrong that flows from those flaws and all the reasons that to cut that person out of your life. No, wait a minute. That's not the purpose of this essay. It is, of course, one option facing you. But what person ever would escape such an examination unscathed? And who would remain in your life if you used those flaws in that way? Look instead at those flaws and see the troubled person in his or her wholeness behind those flaws. See yourself and set yourself to the task of realizing how those flaws and that person or creature have enriched or could enrich your life. One could say that I'm doing nothing more than preaching the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But I am actually talking about applying love, the force behind the golden rule. Nothing about this rule commands that you love the other person. In theory, you need not even like the other person in order to treat him or her right. But it is not just treatment, but acceptance and learning that I am addressing here, and that requires a measure of love. In Midnight's Children, Salman Rushdie's narrator describes his mother's method of learning to love her second husband, a man she had married for solace, for children, but not for love. Each day she selected one fragment of Ahmad Sinai and concentrated her entire being upon it until it became wholly familiar, until she felt fondness rising up within her and becoming affection and finally love. In this way she came to adore his overloud voice and the way it assaulted her eardrums and made her tremble, and his peculiarity of always being in a good mood until after he had shaved. Good reason not to shave, right? After which each morning his manner became stern, gruff, businesslike, and distant, and his vulture-hooded eyes, which concealed what she was sure was his inner goodness behind a bleakly ambiguous gaze, and the way his lower lips jutted out beyond his upper one, and his shortness, which led him to forbid her ever to wear high heels. My God, she told herself, it seems that there are a million different ways to love about every man. Amina could as easily have found a million different things to hate about every man, but she chose differently. And by so choosing, she gained as much as she gave. She gave Ahmad Sinai the love that she felt he deserved, and created a home and a better life for him. She gave herself contentment of heart, serenity, and love and a freshness to life. Rushdie's character reasons, who, after all, ever truly knows another human being completely? At this rate, she thought, there will always be something fresh about him to love. So our marriage just can't go stale. Emily Dickinson perceived the same benefit from her actions. And I'll repeat the poem from earlier. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin unto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. So there it is. We all need help and solace, love, and a freshness and optimism in every day. By accepting the flaws in others and seeking to learn and benefit from those flaws, we may help others even as we help ourselves to love, to contentment, to a freshness in each day, and to peace at the end of our days. Thank you.
Please join me in singing hymn number 124, Be That Guide.
There is one more reading. It's not on the order of source. This is a Chinese folktale. It was emailed to me by Cindy Chan in February of 2007. An elderly Chinese woman had 2 large pots, each hung on the ends of a pole which she carried across her neck. One of the pots had a crack in it, while the other pot was perfect, and always delivered a full portion of water. At the end of the long walks from the stream to the house, the cracked pot arrived only half full. For a full 2 years this went on daily, with the woman bringing home only 1.5 pots of water. Of course, the perfect pot was proud of its accomplishments, but the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its own imperfection, and miserable that it could only do half of what it had been made to do. After 2 years of what it perceived to be bitter failure, it spoke to the woman one day by the stream. I am ashamed of myself because this crack in my side causes water to leak out all the way back to your house. The old woman smiled. Did you notice that there are flowers on your side of the path, but not on the other pot's side? That's because I have always known about your flaw. So I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, and every day while we walk back, you water them. For 2 years I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate the table. Without you being just the way you are, there would not be this beauty to grace the house. And this added by Cindy. Each of us has our own unique flaw, but it's the cracks and flaws we each have that make our lives together so very interesting and rewarding. You've just got to take each person for what they are and look for the good in them.
Please join me in a unison reading of our mission statement, which is in your order of service. This church provides a safe place to celebrate diversity, draw inspiration for our lives, foster social and environmental justice, and compassionately support each other in our spiritual searches.